of sacrificing children, kidnapping children, molesting kids, cutting out the hearts of animals and all that. What is how could you clear that up for everyone watching regarding that? And is that a fair assumption of some people that might be polluting Satanism, or is it all just a bunch of Hollywood spin?
Well, I would have to assert that both are right. And to touch on this point, we have to first consider the source of the sensationalism. All right. In the 1980s, this was, satanic panic. We've all heard of this.
Right.
It was actually big business in those days. And there are many modern Luciferians that make the joke that the all evil Satan keeps Jesus in business.
Right.
And it is true, because as I said before, your conformity is coerced through fear and shame. But when I say consider the source, you will hear these sensationalist reports of children being kidnapped and animal sacrifices, and you may even find a news clipping or two, but you know what you won't find? A single arrest. Now that's got to be interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where are the arrests? For all this child abuse and for all this ritual murder, where are the arrests? You won't find them, because
that's a great point.
We didn't. True.
I don't remember coming across anybody that was involved in that on the inside. Do you?
No.
Yeah.
But when we take into account that we have been led to believe that there's this all evil entity that wants to celebrate us doing the most repugnant and putrescent acts to each other, you will occasionally get a crazy who now is looking to grasp onto something that's going to justify his repugnant behavior. But what is unfair is to assume that these are just all Satanists. Every religion has its people that will misconstrue it and, I guess, use it for their own ends. I can remember in prison when it was pretty well known that I was Luciferian in practice. And I would occasionally get the nutball who would approach me and then begin telling me about all this malevolent, disgusting shit that he likes to get onto, trying to vibe with me. And of course, it didn't take me long to, set them straight and send them packing. Like, you are not what we want. You will misrepresent us. And good luck to you. This is not the path for you. So, with that said, yes, there is those who simply want to pollute it because they need fear and shame in order to maintain their own order. And then we also have those crazies, like I said, looking to justify their own disgusting behavior. Now, these people are not Satanists, Luciferians, Telemics, because one thing you will notice is that they are not embraced by any formal order. These are typically people with psychosis that are just saying they're a part of something and then thinking they're representing it.
I mean, I would be inclined to totally agree with you because, I mean, let's take a look at the current order of things. For example, I recently did a piece, about the whole breakdown and the origin of racial identity, and how two world religions that have probably between the two, billions of followers all over the world. Both of these religions were co-conspirators in one of the greatest scams and lies ever sold to the world, in not only creating racial identities, but also cursing a whole entire race of people to be forever branded as inferior slaves, to be done, to be used for however their slave masters seem fit. And they have a lot of scripture to kind of validate and help them sleep at night in doing this. And not only that, but they have a lot of historical biblical texts that basically points to it as being taken literal. And at the same time, at least one of these both of them have both done some repugnant shit to humanity. On one side, they in some customs, they believe in cutting out the woman's clitoris so that she doesn't experience pleasure in sex. On the other side, have branded a woman as having no soul and being for the sole purpose of childbirth, while also diddling everybody's children in various different altar boy practices. The thing of it is what I find fascinating is how the same people that push a lot of these, a lot of this fake news regarding the left-hand path have actually colluded and backed up and defended people that follow these other practices that have caused more death, more destruction, more backwards ass thinking that have led to a stagnant scientific advancement and evolution of the human race. I mean, shit, we could have probably been to Mars and back already right now if it wasn't for organized religion. Probably almost every single disease, including the big ones that affect people on a virus level, like AIDS and HIV, probably could have already been cured. But a lot of religious idea when it was growing was this is God's will to destroy all the minorities and all the homosexuals of the world. So let's just let it run rampant. Exactly. You and I both know that was the thought in the 80s. And the thing that really kills me with all this is that when you become awakened to these things, the dark and the light, you actually find that the dark and the light are actually two and the same. The Luciferian path, is, of course, embraces the light bringer. The one that brings light and enlightenment to the one that is struggling and is treading the path through the darkness, through the ignorance, through the unknown, through the formless, as you said. So yeah, in my mind and in a lot of minds of people that are on the left-hand path that follow the occult, whether they be, like I said, Luciferian, Satanist, you can even be a practicer of or person that studies theosophy under Helena Blavatsky, Anthroposophagy, the Anthroposophical Society, various Essene and Kabbalistic practices all agree that to take something without somebody's will or to impose your practices on somebody without their permission kind of goes against the whole core belief of finding your own path through the darkness that leads to the light.
It's our greatest sin, if there even such thing as a sin. Consent is everything.
Right. And another one that I could never really quite understand, even though I did try to subscribe to it for a brief period when I was trying to completely martyr myself and free myself from the violent person that I used to be, the destructive person I used to be in the prison system, to where, I followed one of my mentors, and you've heard me talk about him well, who was an Essene yoga master, and, basically taught me to turn the other cheek, and I did that. But what I quickly learned was, and you've heard it in the left-hand path say that, if you turn the other cheek, eventually you're going to run out of cheeks to get slapped.
Yes.
So like when people, kind of think that I'm a little dark when I say that I believe somebody that harms a child should just be put to death. What is your take on that? If somebody like harms a child without, the child obviously doesn't have a choice in the matter, what should be done with a person like that?
Well, here's the thing about the left-hand path. We have no promise of heaven. We have no threat of hell. And if there is no good and evil, then what is our code of conduct? And for that, the answer is simple: consequences of your actions and the personal responsibility for them. So with that said, if it is your will to savage a child, then you have to open yourself up to the consequences of an act like that. The parents may want to kill you. The family may come after you. Society is going to cage you like an animal. And in terms of transcendental left-hand path, where it is about mastering and controlling your base nature, what people would call an act of evil, we call an act of primitive animalistic savagery. And it is of my personal opinion that if you want to act like a mad dog, then you should be put down like one.
Absolutely. My thoughts exactly. Because, like I said, I deal with a lot of people that are in criminal justice reform, and people, they subscribe to the humanist kind of like, basically, humanists and Christianity are one and the same, even though they try to separate themselves from each other. But the humanist or the Christian practice of, well, we should forgive them and try to teach them to be better. Well, in my mind, I don't think that there's really anything that could be done with a psychotic person like that. I don't think that you can like beat it out of them with therapy or with some kind of dogma or religion. I believe that those kind of people will always be predators in such
Mhm.
a way, because it's not a criminal nature. It's not like the kid in the inner city that becomes a gang member or becomes a drug dealer, or somebody robs a bank, or somebody does this or that. This is like a psychological defect in this
Mhm.
person's genetics somewhere that has basically convinced them in their perverted mind that this child is solely here for my sexual exploitation. And it comes from a lot of ancient religious practices. I mean, in some Islamic countries, it's okay to marry a girl who's 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, you
Yes, it
know?
is.
And in a lot of these ancient, Christian monasteries on the other side, it was okay to, you know, sexually mentor these young boys and do these things to them and stuff. So I think that this is kind of like,
Sodomites.
yeah, a genetic breakdown somewhere in the evolution of humanity. And so what would be the left-hand path's solution to a lot of this nonsense that goes on? Is like, from what you just told me, it sounds like, you know, the left-hand path is more designed towards teaching people to overcome this animalistic and superstitious practice of being stuck in the optics of
Mhm.
life and all these things. And when you have an organization or mass organized dogma that teaches all these things, and then more than likely it would actually trigger somebody to basically act upon them. Is that fair to say that?
I would. And the thing you have to understand about the left hand path is that its whole purpose is to take human the beast and turn them into human the God. So, in order to do that, one must cultivate strength. And the left hand path will always put logic and practicality over mysticism. And in the interest of logic and practicality, you have to ask yourself, is shepherding the weak and allowing them to have 6 or 7 kids really a practical solution that's not going to have dire consequences for the human race as a whole? Now, that might be seen as controversial, and I'm sure I'm going to get trolled for saying that. Like, oh, look at this cool guy who thinks that we shouldn't save these people. But, you know, the universe is full of disorder, and it's up to us to impose a form on it. That is what darkness is. And we cannot do that from a standpoint of what's the word I'm looking for? Genetic inviolability. Because as you said, this isn't a cultural influence. This isn't something that learned. This is a real defect in their mind. And my theory is that some people, they don't sexually develop. I mean, because you can remember being a 10-year-old boy, did you not have crushes on other 10-year-old girls? And then as you became 14, you had crushes on other 14-year-old girls, so on and so forth. My theory is that this is somehow stunted in them. And perhaps in the future, medical science and through further study, we could get down to the root of it, and we could prove it as something that could be cured. And logic and reason and embracing those above mysticism, we should embrace science and see what we can come up with. But right now we have a problem. And the only way I believe to solve it is to no longer coddle and pity these individuals.
Good point. All right, let me switch gears a little bit and get to the heart of like who Jay Burkholder is like as a person. You know, what some people would want to know, like how did this man end up going to prison? You know, how did he, some people would even try to like totally assassinate everything you said and say, well, if he's so enlightened, if he's such a badass Luciferian and all that, how did he end up in prison? How does anybody that has an elite occult practice end up in such a place as prison? So let's talk a little bit about how did Jay end up in prison? We've talked about it a million times and the story's pretty interesting. So let's go ahead and hear it from you if you're willing to discuss it.
Okay, well, let's see. Certainly not the straightest of lines. And as far as those who would seek to assassinate somebody's integrity or who they are for given their past, I would only have to say is everyone's path to manhood is going to be different. And some are going to be more rocky than others. Now, my path to enlightenment was fraught in the beginning with a litany of getting shit dead wrong and making the most horrible choices a person could make. And I blame nobody. I did wrong and I had consequences and I lived through them. So people want to know, what did I do 6 years with my man JB here? Well, I guess to start it out was that, as I stated before, and why the imminent left hand did not work out for me, is that I have an addictive personality. And that addictive personality led to an addiction. It led to an opioid addiction. And I was unfortunately given these things like candy by doctors because I was horribly burned in my past, over 80% of my body, 23% of it third degree. And I had extensive nerve damage. And their way of fixing this was to simply throw painkillers at me. So naturally, I became addicted. Now, we'll fast forward to me realizing I had a problem, and then I decided that I wanted to solve it. So with no court order, no jail time, I got myself on a very wonderful drug called Suboxone. Now, it was the magic wand. It took away the physical addiction so then I could fight the war in my head. And it worked for me. I got myself free and clear. Now, let's fast forward to the night that I got in trouble. All right. So I'm at a gentleman's club, as was my wont to do. I went to the bathroom and I noticed a young man. He was throwing up in the stall. The stall had no door. And I caught a glimpse of it. It was that yellow foam. It was that junkie puke. Okay. So me on alcohol, very altruistic, think I could save the world. So I was compelled to approach this young man. Hey, tell me your story. Now he laid it all out for it. He's thirsty. He's doing bad. I need help. All right. So at this time, I had a pocket of the sublingual Suboxone tabs. And I had leftover because I was needing less and less at this point. So I decided to essentially pass the cure to this young man. And hopefully he could make it work for himself as I did. He took it. I told him to take only half at first, and then I gave him my number, which was the kiss of death, to text me later. And then we had plans. I was going to drive him 50 miles outside of my small town to a special doctor at that time, the only one in the area who could prescribe them. He gets his help. I get my halo. Everybody wins. Unfortunately, his body did not react well. We are not 100% sure if he didn't take anything else that night, but long story short is that 12 hours later, this young man was dead, and I was in handcuffs for it. So my charge was officially delivery that resulted in death.
It happens a lot, too. I've actually met several people in the federal system that had that exact same charge.
Yeah, the only The only thing I got lucky on was that Suboxone was a Schedule 3, so there was no mandatory minimum. As with Schedule 2s, your coke, your heroin, those have, I mean, you kill somebody with those, your minimum's 25 years.
Right.
So I caught a break there. 0 to 15, they gave me 78 months.
And you said that like 80% of your body was burned. So what happened that you got? What kind of an accident were you in that led to those kind of burns?
Oh, a fiery car accident, unfortunately.
Were you alone, or were there other people with you?
There were other people with me, unfortunately.
They didn't.
And lucky to be alive. It turned into, let's see, 3 months, pretty much confined to an ICU bed. Another 3 months learning how to walk again. And then it took about 2 years of outpatient physical therapy to get right. You know, it's quite a journey.
That's nuts because I mean, I see you and I'm looking at you, and I've seen your body for the most part, you know, above the pants, of course.
Yeah.
But I have seen you in shorts, and I have seen like the burns in your legs and stuff. And the funny thing is it almost seemed like your skin was literally like healing faster, like the more that you were getting into this path. You pretty much, most of your body is covered with what's called Solomonic symbols, sigils, right?
Yes, yeah. That's
And
66.
you got 60 of them, right?
66.
66. And I know that you came very much interested in learning what was called the angelic language, or the Enochian dialect, to where, I mean, how has that gone? Have you like moved away from that, or are you pretty good at reading the Enochian language? And
It takes a minute. It takes me a while to study each word, and then I got to kind of put it together in my head, because it is not a simple like substitution language. I mean, it has its own characters, and then it has its own words for things.
right.
So it takes a while, and then of course it's an older language, so it goes, you know, towards the left instead of the right. So everything is backwards in our Western minds. But no, I still a fervent practice of it, and it's even my main form of sigil magic called the Leo Gaeth. And I have found that using the Enochian language in sigil magic is immensely powerful and gets us incredible results.
Yeah, so let's touch on that a little bit, because I'm sure people would want to know more about that. So at the expense of, you know, them not getting confused. So what is the Enochian language, and what significance do these 66 sigils being tattooed on your body? What purpose were they for, and what purpose does this Enochian language? What does it bring the adept that is practicing these things?
Well, all right. So the to get started on the tattoo scheme, as you know, I showed you were actually a big part of my life and the presence of their cultivation, and you got to see them start from one to pretty much my entire body. There's actually 3 practices altogether tattooed on my body: the Clavicula Solomonis, the Clavicula Solomonis Regis, and then the Heptarchia Domestica. And then I've opted for a Pythagorean signet ring on both my middle fingers, and then the Ring of Solomon on my point finger. Now, what we discovered through a former coven of mine was that these 3 disciplines from 3 different, very different cultures, very different time periods, were actually interlocking pieces of a puzzle. And that set us on the path of going, well, how big does that puzzle actually go? So in plugging in these on my body, the intent was to wire them into my chakras, especially the base ones. Whereas, as you've seen, the ones on my chest and the ones on my upper back are the encapsulation of my heart chakra.